batteries.
Oh, I got it.
You got it?
Thank you, Faisal, for that nice introduction and for this amazing museum that you have created. And there will be time after the event for people who haven't been through the museum to take a look. So I'm Stanley Heller. My office with the organization Promoting Enduring Peace is administrator. And before I introduce our speakers, I want to tell you a little bit about Promoting Enduring Peace, or PEP as we call it. I know there's another PEP, Progressive Except for Palestine, but we were there first. It was started in 1952 by a former professor of the Yale Divinity School, Jerome Davis. He was terrified at the thought that the Soviets and the US would engage in an all-out nuclear war, and he started PEP to do what could be done to lessen tensions and to promote understanding. Our slogan is Peace on Earth, Peace with Earth, expressing anti-war and environmental concerns. In 1960, PEP started the Gandhi Peace Award, which has been given to luminaries such as Eleanor Roosevelt, Dorothy Day, Tom Goldtooth, Cesar Chavez, and most recently to Palestinian BDS activist Omar Barghouti, Ralph Nader, and singer Jackson Browne. A few years ago, the family of the late Mark Shafer gave us a grant to have a yearly lecture in his name. Mark was a professor of peace studies at USC and on the board of PEP for a number of years. Since 2013, the lecture has been given by Phil Donahue, Gail Walker, Christian Parente, Timothy Snyder, and last year by Frida Berrigan. We see our mission as pushing to the edge, promoting dangerous ideas and bringing these ideas to activist groups working in various fields. Last year we held a conference called The Green New Deal and Other Ideas on How to Avoid Climate Catastrophe. I hope you'll look at a flyer we have at our table called What Should We Demand? Our very bold ideas about a people's takeover of the fossil fuel and transportation industries. We urge you to become a PEP member. With a $20 membership, you get a choice of a steel drinking bottle, not plastic, not that nasty plastic, or a jute bag, again, not plastic, or Jackson Browne, there is some plastic here, but Jackson Browne's latest album. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh. He's the director of the Palestinian Museum of Natural History and Institute for Biodiversity Research in Bethlehem in occupied Palestine. He's spoken all over the world about the denial of Palestinian human rights and issues of climate change and biodiversity in the Middle East and the world. He was formerly director of the Cytogenetics Department at Yale University. In 2018, he was a National Geographic grantee. He's the author of several books, including Sharing the Land of Canaan and Popular Resistance in Palestine, and a dear friend of mine for 20 years, Dr. Mazin Qumsiyeh.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on this cold weather. About a year ago, I received an email from Obaya Boudi, who said, you're a recognized scientist in Palestine. I've been on your email list for a long time, and I would like to invite you to a meeting called Scientists for Palestine at MIT. And that's the main reason why I came to the US at this time. And of course, I accepted the invitation. It's an opportunity after especially learning more about this meeting and the idea behind it, and that there's going to be even Nobel Prize winners at this meeting, and it's a gathering of concerned scientists who want to bring human rights and justice to Palestine. Unfortunately, Ubay, who was the executive director of the Bisan Center for Research in Ramallah, who was organizing this meeting, was arrested November 13 when Israeli soldiers came to his house at 3 in the morning and kidnapped him, basically, and he's been held hardly without any contacts with anybody. His wife, I think, saw him one time only, and he's been mistreated, and we demand his release, and in the end, hopefully, we can have Stan kindly made the banner for his release, and maybe we can all pose with the picture of the banner, with our picture with the banner, so that we can release him. Amnesty International released basically a release about him asking for his release as a political detainee. Anyways, so I do want to say something about this meeting of scientists for Palestine that was held, and you can see the banners for it. At MIT. MIT is where my son was graduated from, as some of you may know. Did his bachelor and master degree, so I used to go up there frequently. MIT is famous for a lot of research. Some of it has to do with military, unfortunately, and my son refused to participate in any research that's connected to the military when he was at MIT. Science can be used for both good things and bad things, as you can imagine, and now with the, basically everything we say, even what we are talking about here, is being recorded and listened to in Tel Aviv, so, and Washington, probably Virginia and other places. So we have invasion of privacy. We have a system that's stacked against us that uses scientific technology and knowledge. But we can also use science for good things. This is Mahatma Gandhi looking through a microscope. My own scientific background, I don't know if you know, has involved research at places like Duke University and Yale University, publishing research at cutting edge in genetics and medical genetics. For example, I was the first scientist to explain why different species have different chromosome numbers. Why do humans have 46 chromosomes, etc. And I was the first to explain how chromosome abnormalities lead to spontaneous abortion, and why children with Down syndrome have mental retardation. It has little to do with 3 copies instead of 2 copies of a gene, as was believed before. I also did some key environmental work in Palestine before I came to the US and after I came to the US. And now our institute does research in various fields, and but they all pour down the issue of sustainability. How do we sustain human life and environment at the same time in Palestine, even under colonial occupation? Now, very briefly, for those of you who didn't hear me in the past, I do want to quickly go over this patient history, patient diagnosis, therapy, and prognosis for the situation in Palestine. Palestine, of course, is part of the Fertile Crescent, where our ancestors, and I say our because it's also your ancestors, because as you know, we all came out of Africa before we went to Europe and the rest of the world. So our collective ancestors, the Canaanites, and developed agriculture, domesticated plants and animals. And these people who domesticated plants and animals are the Canaanites, and this happened about 12,000 years ago. That's why Jericho is the oldest continuously inhabited town on earth, by the way. Palestine is also not just important for human migration, it was important for animal migration, and remains so to this day, that birds, unfortunate for the politicians, they cannot stop birds from flying. So the borders, this idea of borders, I don't know, whoever came up with it, it's silly. But anyways, Birds migrate from Eurasia to Africa. Every year, 500 million birds pass through our country. And these are the people of this country. These are the native Palestinians and this museum, and I am really grateful for our host, Faisal, who started this museum on his own, with his own money. Sort of like I also started the museum in Palestine with my own money and resources. But it highlights this history, and it's, you know, for the mythology of a land without a people, for a people without a land, museums like this are really essential. They are critical for showing that indeed there were people and there were cultures long before such stupid ideas like Zionism came about in the late 19th century. This is a picture of my great-grandmother actually walking down the steps of the old house in Beit Sahur in the shepherd's field, where the shepherds heard the angels sing, went up to Bethlehem. One of those kids on the right is my grandfather, and the house is still there. It has been built a few hundred years ago. And we have been living there and breathing there and doing things there, you know, for thousands of years without any problems, by the way. This patient is not always sick, so to speak. Palestine has been very peaceful, very, very few conflicts. And this peace also allows innovation and creativity, like the creation of the alphabet that you use today. The ABCs come from us, from the Aramaic. The same as the Arabic alphabet, by the way, comes from Proto-Aramaic. So our students research these things, and we tell them about these things. Now, we do have a problem here, and you know it. I don't want to make this a political lecture. I didn't want to do that. We do have a problem that's related to an idea called Zionism, which was adopted by the British and the French empires, who actually left us a legacy of borders and stupidities and dividing countries like Syria and Lebanon, Iraq and Palestine, Jordan. All of these divisions were done by Sykes-Picot Agreement, London and Paris, basically. And then followed immediately after by the Balfour and Jules-Cambon declarations in support of this, again, stupid idea called Zionism. But this conflict, even if you take it as 100 or 120 years, is a very small percentage of our history of, again, 12,000 years of civilization. And the conflict before it, you'd have to go back to the Crusaders to find this conflict, another conflict. Both of these, by the way, came to us from Europe. So no thanks to Europe for our problems. But the result of this was very obvious, which is to take this very rich, beautiful culture that lasted in harmony with nature for over 12,000 years of civilization and destroy it, and destroy all these Palestinian villages and towns, 530 of them, as you see on the map there, that were destroyed, the red dots on that map, to create the so-called Jewish state of Israel. I say so-called because I don't really believe that Zionism has anything to do with Judaism or Jewishness, and Stan has published a very nice book about the collaboration of the Zionists with anti-Semites, and also Lenny Brenner here has done some earlier books that inspired Stan and inspired me for some of our work. But anyway, the bottom line is there was ethnic cleansing of these villages, and today 7.5 million of us Palestinians are refugees or displaced people, including the family of Yusuf that you heard about. Now there's a website called Visualizing Palestine. Here again, where technology and science can work positive things and can work negative things, I think this is a positive use of technology and knowledge, is to visualize with graphics what had happened in Palestine. As you can see here how, for example, since the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in 1967, there has been demolishing of Palestinian homes at the bottom, and on the top, the built-up of Jewish-only colonies or homes. And this about the demographic changes and basically the removal of Palestinians And by the way, the first removal of Palestinians, first Palestinian refugees, was not in 1948 when the State of Israel was created. It started in the 1920s under British rule and the control of people like Herbert Samuels, a Zionist leader of Palestine in the 1920s, appointed by the British. But the bottom line is 3.8 almost million Jewish immigrants came to us from around the world, and 1.7 million Palestinians were removed. And of course, their children and grandchildren. That's what accounts for the fact that, as I mentioned, 7.5 million of us are refugees or displaced people. Palestinians are relegated to small Bantustans, ghettos in the Galilee, in the West Bank, and in the Negev, and in the Gaza Strip, where Yusuf comes from. And these ghettos altogether account for 8.3% of the historic land of Palestine. In South Africa, under apartheid, the blacks were relegated to 11.5% of the land, so we're actually worse than apartheid in South Africa. When my son was 13 years old, he saw the shrinking map of the US at the bottom, and it gave him the idea to draw the shrinking map of Palestine in 1998, and this has been used by many people, including now Visualizing Palestine came up with this even more brilliant idea of showing how Jewish colonies have replaced Palestinian communities. The gray dots in the map on the left in 1882 is basically the Palestinian villages and towns and their ownership of the land. And as you see, slowly more and more Jewish colonies in blue. And today, you know, the gray is almost gone, and the Zionists want it all gone, of course. This is the diagnosis of settler colonialism, of course, and so it's important to make this diagnosis as settler colonialism. Settler colonialism also affects the environment. For example, draining of the wetland, of the Hula reserves, that destroyed 119 species, the uprooting of all these Palestinian villages and their associated trees and landscape, and then planting a monoculture of European pine trees to replace them is another mega project that the Zionists have engaged in, a diversion of the Jordan Valley water from Lake Tiberias that dried up the Jordan Valley and resulted in the shrinking of the Dead Sea is another mega project. And there's even an Israeli author, Alan Tal, who wrote a book called Pollution in the Promised Land, an environmental history of Israel. I think it's remarkable. But anyways, now the Dead Sea is shrinking, Israel is also building a canal between the Red Sea and the Dead Sea that will destroy the Wadi Araba and destroy the coral reefs of the Aqaba area, or Eilat, as they now call that town there. And this is very devastating environmentally. Basically, they'll pump the water up, desalinate it, pump it down. The sludge, basically what's left of the desalination, will be dumped into the Dead Sea. Very, very catastrophic project. Cost $20 billion. And the reason it's put on the Jordanian side is that Jordan will be left holding the bag for this very useless and totally destructive environment, a very useless economically, totally destructive project, because that's how the World Bank and the IMF work, by the way, to put the other countries under their thumb, is they give them large amounts of money for projects they don't really need, and then they can control their economies and make sure that Jordan will always be subservient to the US and votes with it. This is Jabal Abu Ghnaim near my village of Beit Sahur, which what it used to look like in 1997 on the top, and what it looks like now today is basically a concrete jungle. That's another environmentally catastrophic project. These are symptoms, I would say, and what Yusuf also talked about are symptoms of settler colonialism. What's the output of or outcome of settler colonialism? It's one of three models. Either the Algerian model, where 1.5 million natives were killed, 1 million French left. Many of them have never seen France in their lives. They were 6, 7 generations in Algeria. The second model is the Australian USA model, where there's genocide of the native people. Both Model 1 and Model 2 are rare. Model 3 is the most frequent model, and it involves basically the descendants of the colonizers and the descendants of the colonized living in one country. That's found in places like South America, like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, other places. Also Central America, like Colombia and Panama and so forth, and North America, like Mexico and Canada. And also, you know, Southeast Asia, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Taiwan, all these countries. Taiwan, by the way, is where my wife is from. And she is a descendant not of the native people of Taiwan, she's a descendant of the colonizers of Taiwan. Okay, what happens in those countries? People live together. It's not kumbaya, by the way, it's not happiness, wonderful life, but it's at least less bloody than scenario number 1 and scenario number 2. And we Palestinians have always pushed for scenario number 3. As you know, we also tried to follow or emulate what happened in South Africa, because it's the most recent event of starting decolonization process. Now, that's the outcome, that's prognosis, as we say in the medical field. The therapy, of course, is resistance, and resistance can be by many ways. Even going to school is resistance, like these girls trying to get to school and sit in the street and have their class because the soldier prevents them from getting to school, etc. Resistance, of course, is not cheap. And so far we've lost 100,000 natives, and you heard the story of Yusuf's friend, for example, and others. Over 800,000 have been injured, and over 700,000, actually close to 1 million, somebody corrected me the other day, who have been imprisoned or jailed. This is me being arrested a few times, and I personally lost 19 of my personal friends, just like Yusuf lost some friends in their struggle. This is, for example, Bassem Abu Rahma was shot with a tear gas canister that crushed his heart. And I went to his funeral, and a month later I went to visit his family, and his sister Jawahir showed me the room that he was, his room, and unfortunately she herself was killed by inhaling tear gas at the same weekly demonstration in Belain. This is the last friend I lost, Bassel Araj, a very smart young man who actually we employed at the Palestinian Museum in Birzeit and also at our museum as a contractor, because he lost his job as a pharmacist due to his political activism. And then he was experimenting with the resistance and various forms of resistance. Here he and I are standing in front of a bus stop, and he's wearing a t-shirt on boycott, divestment, sanctions. And the reason we were standing in front of a bus stop is we called it Palestine Freedom Riders, to show that Israel is a racist state, that we're not allowed on these public buses as Palestinian Christian and Muslim. You know, Bassel Araj is Muslim, my family is Christian, and we're not allowed on these buses. I'm not allowed to Jerusalem even with my US passport, by the way. So anyways, we were trying to demonstrate that, and of course I dragged us out of the bus, and they beat Bassel and all the young people. I wasn't beaten at that time. I guess maybe difference to my age. But anyways, so we opened the first, actually, ethnography research museum in our Museum of Natural History. That's happened since I visited here last, when I spoke here 2.5 years ago, if you remember, Faisal, in June, I think, or July 2017.
18.
17, actually.
No, 18. We weren't open in 17.
Okay. Anyways, okay, so a while ago I spoke here, but we hadn't opened the Museum of Ethnography, and now we have Museum of Ethnography. If those of you who visited us can now visit, they'll see where we keep all the agricultural tools, instruments, even beehives that our ancestors, the Canaanitic ancestors, used to make from straw and mud and things like that. This is at the opening of the museum, and you can see both tangible and intangible being shown on TVs and stuff like that in this museum. We work also not just to have a museum, we work with the communities on conservation, because as I said earlier, the vision of the museum is sustainable human and natural communities. So to sustain human and natural communities, you have to make sure that people have a buy-in into their own sustainability and the sustainability of the nature around them. So for example, we have some work in Wadi Zarqa that we protected an area that's very endangered, supported by the Belgian government and so forth. We work with children regularly in all the communities we work in to show them how to recycle and upcycle things. And we even have a community garden now in the museum for the children of the two nearby refugee camps, which are Azza and Aida, to come and basically plant their own plants, and also learn about technologies like aquaculture and aquaponics. And aquaculture, aquaponics, and aquaponics grows fish that the volunteers eat. We did some work on climate change that's tailored to the local community. This is a project funded by the city of Geneva, where we did basically systems of protection of the environment and reducing our carbon footprint, etc., via innovative tools. This is a project that we did in a World Heritage Site, as Stan mentioned. We got the first and only grant from National Geographic Society, and the Darwin Initiative also first and only grant given to Palestinians to basically protect this valley and the communities around it. The communities around it include Batir, Al-Walaja, where I was arrested about 7 or 8 times, and Al-Walaja, Batir, Hussan, and Beit Jala. These are just some of our staff whom we sent. For example, the lower left-hand corner, Muhammad Abusar, Muhammad Najajra and Rina Saeed, who went to Geneva on this climate change project. Muhammad Abusar Khan in the upper right-hand corner started with me as high school volunteer, and now he is, I mean, I can't tell you how genius this kid is. He published his first paper when he was in first year of college, studying biology, and then he's doing his master's degree now with me, and he's already published something like 8 papers, 8 research papers, and he just finished writing our annual report, all on his own. He gathered all the information, annual 2019 report for the museum, which is beautiful. I'll share it with you. That's why please sign the email list that moved around. We started a group called the Palestine Action for the Planet, where we, for example, distributed this very small piece of paper to people, and thousands of people we distributed this paper to, basically to encourage them to protect nature and deal with the situation. We opened the museum in April 2017, but as I mentioned, we opened the ethnography exhibit after I came here in April 2019, which is last year basically, and we hope to open the Green Building in 2021. We have, our museum has become a role model for people around the world, and part of it is we also don't just do it and be quiet about it. We actually publish research papers like these two about the role of these museums. And this, as you can imagine, brings out the name of Palestine international papers like Bioscience and International Journal of Environmental Studies. Again, the Zionists are not very happy about this, but this attracts a lot of attention to us. and we got invited to speak to a number of places. And I spoke in the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Egypt, and Uganda to groups who were interested in emulating us and doing the same as we are doing. And just last week, I was awarded a prize when I'm going to Abu Dhabi to receive an environmental prize for the work of the museum. Our keys to success is that we do research first. We know what we are talking about. And the second is collaboration locally and internationally. And the third is our motto, which is respect. First, as Palestinians, we respect ourselves. The first 2 years in this museum, by the way, I had no staff, no volunteers, I had volunteers. I didn't have staff, I didn't have any outside money, nothing. It was all done with our internal resources. That's self-respect. After that, we started getting support from outside. And I say respect ourselves first, second, respect other people, other cultures, other backgrounds, and third, respect nature. They have to be in that order. A Palestinian who throws a cigarette out of the car is not first respecting himself before they show respect for others or respect for nature. So we also use time wisely, we use IT. My son, sometimes I think the jigsaw puzzle comes out without me planning it. Turns out my son is a computer whiz because he graduated from MIT, worked as a software engineer at Google. So he even invented a book scanner that he brought and assembled to us in Palestine, basically smuggled it through Israeli customs. And we can scan books and share knowledge with thousands of people around the world. I'm a person who doesn't believe in copyright, so even my book you can find on my website, and my publisher is not happy about this. But anyways, I believe knowledge should be shared. Innovation and motivation is important. This is what the museum will look like in a few years, or 2 years when we open it. Now, how can you help? First, being here is very important, I appreciate it. But you can also come and volunteer if you choose to. These are one of our international volunteers decorating the upper pool. These are a bunch of international volunteers working to make the apricot jam during the apricot season. We have our garden has lots of fruits and vegetables and things like that. I finally want to say, put this picture in the end, because I think it's a picture that illustrates Palestine in what I call the beauty of Palestine. The woman in the black hat in the middle, her name is Mati al-Mughannam. She wrote a book in 1936, and I'm sure Martin Luther King read it. Why? Because almost some of his words are exactly the words that she was using in that book. They told her, why don't you stick to women's rights? Why do you have to speak against the British and against the Zionists and against this and against that? She answered in exactly the same way. All great minds think alike. But anyways, it's hypocritical if we say, this is a Palestinian struggle, or this is a Vietnamese struggle, or this is a Black Lives Matter struggle. Why? I'm not black. The first struggle I joined, by the way, was not the Palestinian struggle, believe it or not. I was at the University of Connecticut, a master's student, young 22, 23-year-old. I was elected president of the International Student Union at the University of Connecticut. And this black guy comes to me, he says, Mazin, you're now the president. He's a friend of mine. I said, yeah. He said, what are you going to do about South Africa? And I was like so naive, I said, what's wrong with South Africa? This is 1980 I'm talking about. And of course he educated me, and we brought a speaker from London actually, who later I found out is a member of the ANC, the African National Congress. And of course the ANC was designated terrorist organization, and so of course he couldn't publicize his connections to the ANC. And he had to be very, very careful what he said when he was here. But he also educated us, and then when we asked him, what do you want us to do? He said, well, you know, there's 1,000 things you can do. You can do media work, or work on your congressman, lobby, you know, like Yusuf told you, there's God, call the congressman, whatever. And he said, you can engage in BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions. That's the first time, by the way, I heard the word BDS. Well, not in connection with Palestine, it was in connection with South Africa. So, why did we care about South Africa? What was it about South Africa that, you know, it was so far away? But it is this human struggle and this human decency and the understanding, by the way, that all our struggles are connected. I was invited to speak in Mumbai, by the way. 500 people attended my lecture. Most of them, essentially 98% of them, were what's called the lower caste. You know, disenfranchised people who are really in Indian Hindu structures were discriminated against. And so I was I knew the answer, but I wanted to confirm it. I said, you know, there's 1 million people on the streets in Mumbai, living on the streets, you know, some of them naked or half naked, and they don't have anything. Why do you care about Palestine? Why invite me to come and speak? As I said to the leader of this group that invited me, he said, well, do you know who Modi is? I said, yeah, of course I know who Modi is. He said, do you know who his best friend is? I said, yeah, Netanyahu. He said, that's the clique that we're fighting. That's the group we're fighting. And our struggles are connected. And it is true, you know, Netanyahu, you know, Modi and Trump and all these people who are in power and are very rich, making the rich richer and the poor poorer. This is our enemy, and we should join forces to fight these people, including, by the way, Abu Mazin, the president of the Palestinian Authority, but that's another story. Okay, I should stop here and take some questions, and I'm happy to answer them.
At the start of his lecture, Dr. Qumsiyeh spoke about the plight of Ubay Aboudi. At the end of the event at the Palestine Museum, a number of the members of the audience stood behind this banner